Episode 97, Phoenix 4. Thud. Jude landed like a feather because of the brilliant golden whirlwind. He put Cordelia down while Red Wind landed with a series of thudding sounds. Be careful, the attack would begin as soon as you cross that line. Cordelia spoke in a low voice and promptly lit a magic light to drive out the darkness. As expected, this is the High Elves' architectural style. The unknown spirit warrior must have been a high elf. Hearing the words of violent avalanche, Jude and Cordelia looked into the distance. They could see the rock egg where the phoenix was sealed straight ahead. Are you ready? I'm ready. What about you, Red Wind? I'm ready too. Okay, then let's go. Why are you not asking about me? The voices ended with violent avalanche speaking. Jude just looked ahead, but the kind Cordelia opened her mouth for violent avalanche. Are you ready, violent avalanche? I am. All right, then let's go. Cordelia said as she tapped the back of Jude, who then nodded. In his mind, he recalled the dungeon in the game. A series of straightforward traps. A series of straightforward flame attacks would beset them in the passage leading to the ceiling area, perhaps because a phoenix was sealed here. But if they knew where, what, and how the attack would unfold, they would be able to fully respond. Formation complete, let's go. Thud. Jude kicked the ground and took the lead. At that moment, flames shot down above his head, but Jude unhesitatingly raised his right hand high. He made a shield using Count Chase's ring to stop the flames, and passed the flame zone in less than a second. Cold air. And Cordelia ran right behind him. Because Cordelia was wearing items with freezing attributes, she wasn't even slightly harmed by the flames at all. The flames' momentum was broken by Jude, who had already passed by, and then pushed away by the cold air magic that Cordelia cast, so she was able to easily pass too. Yuzuo. Violent avalanche just ran, and so did Red Wind. She was wearing items with flame attributes in the first place, so Red Wind was strong against the flames in a different sense than Cordelia. Let's move on. Here I go. Cordelia took the lead this time. She blocked the flames in advance on both sides by using a telekinetic power covered with the cold air spell, while Jude stepped forward and spread out the shield to stop the suddenly appearing flames. Yuzuo. Violent just ran this time again, and Red Wind was not much different. And that repeated for 5 times. After finally breaking through all the traps and arriving at the ceiling area, Jude and Cordelia exchanged glances and immediately took action. Sword of Calamity. She had changed the spear version of Calamity, which she had always used, into a sword version. With the jet black flame sword, Cordelia broke the magic circle that was drawn on the floor, which led to the seal itself to be destroyed. SZZZZZK. Sparks rose from the ground and magical energy erupted everywhere, making Red Wind swallow her breath. She then swung the blessed blunt weapon in her hand and struck the rock egg. Boom! A thunderbolt struck. The rock egg shattered with the sound of thunder, and a huge roar shook the entire ceiling area at that moment. Kairella. The roaring of the phoenix was similar to why a chicken cries in the bright morning. Flames burst out in front of them, and a yellow color filled their vision. The heat they felt seemed like it could melt their whole bodies. Yuzuo. At that very moment, Violent Avalanche jumped up. Jude grabbed such Violent Avalanche and pushed Violent Avalanche into their pre-calculated position. Boom! The raging flames, or to be precise, the shooting flames, collided into Violent Avalanche. Although Violent Avalanche was weak, it was still a wild god. Violent Avalanche was also the wild god of avalanches, who ruled a rocky mountain. The flames were stopped by the force of an immensely cold air, and the death flames that occurred when the phoenix awoke were neutralized and disappeared. Gaura. Jude hastily recovered the screaming Violent Avalanche before he raised his head. This is because the phoenix who woke up had spread out its wings and flew outwards. Hurry up. Let's merge. Cordelia sprinted and merged with Jude as he carried her. Jude ran after the phoenix, while Red Wind followed them after carrying Violent Avalanche. And immediately after, Kaira. The phoenix shrieked when it tried to fly out of the ceiling area. It was because of the cold air magic circle cast by the shamans of the Great Storm tribe, who were waiting outside the ceiling area. Okay. In the original story, Red Wind had to face the Phoenix alone, but not now. So they came up with this plan. An easy and fast strategy that they couldn't do in the game. Cha-cha. Jude kicked the wall as he jumped up at once and flew out of the entrance. While holding Cordelia, he rolled on the floor once before they quickly stood up. Kyuo. The Phoenix angrily screamed and rushed towards Frost Wind, the great shaman of the Great Storm tribe. It was as expected and as planned. Cordelia. Okay. Frost Wind and the shaman's spells blocked the Phoenix. The Phoenix tried to attack Frost Wind like a bird catching its prey. When its feet touched the ground for a moment, Cordelia dug into that gap. Freeze. It was a simple freezing spell that bound the target. But it was important to note that the caster was Cordelia. Double casting spells echo. One spell quickly became 4. In addition, Cordelia's level had reached around 60, which let her use a new skill. Freeze, freeze, freeze. High-speed chanting. A unique skill of wizards that allowed them to use magic in quick succession. Because it was a relatively simple magic, it was possible to use it 4 times in a row, even if her mastery of high-speed chanting was still low. And if double casting and spells echo was added to this. KQR. The Phoenix screamed in pain as something surprising happened. The whole body of the Phoenix began to freeze. 16 freeze shots. Jude shouted while Cordelia's nose bled. Because she had randomly shot magic spells too quickly. But Cordelia was undaunted and swallowed the contents of a potion. Jude ran forward and tore the magic circles he had drawn overnight. Magic fixation, magic resistance reduction. What he used were spells that increased the duration of the already cast magic and reduced the enemy's magic resistance. The Phoenix was a flame spirit whose whole body was made of flames, so in order for it to remain frozen, he had to do at least that much. Okay, here we go. Cordelia wiped the blood from her lips and nose before she powerfully shouted and cast 16 freeze shots again. The already frozen Phoenix was frozen even more. KQR. The Phoenix continued to scream in the midst of this. Well, it could still scream after all. Because Jude and Cordelia adjusted the magic spells so that only the Phoenix's head did not freeze. Why was that? Why did they leave out the head? Red Wind. Heads, head. Cordelia shouted at Red Wind, who was late in coming out of the ceiling area with violent avalanche, and Red Wind responded to Cordelia's call. As she had been taught yesterday, she shouted head and swung her blessed blunt weapon. Ak, zak, zak. The Phoenix was a flame spirit that had no substance, so it was immune to most physical attacks, but Red Wind's attacks were an exception. The blunt weapon that was blessed by the 3 wild gods, violent avalanche, gentle snow breeze and great storm, hit the Phoenix's spirit body itself. Heads, head. The frozen and immobile Phoenix had its head pounded like mad by Red Wind. The Phoenix shrieked and tried to break the ice, but it was impossible. Jude and Cordelia did not let it do so. 16 freeze shots. Magic fixation, magic resistance reduction. Crack, crack, crack. If the ice seemed to slightly break, the ice froze again. Because of its lowered magic resistance, Red Wind's attacks were more painful. KQR Ak. Head. Red Wind did not stop. She was sweating a lot while Jude calculated the health of the Phoenix and of Red Wind's attack. As a result, he figured out the total number of attacks she still needed to do. Just 50 more. Hey! The Phoenix swallowed its scream at Jude's cry. 50 more hits from now. 50 more. Kyra. When the Phoenix loudly screamed, Cordelia turned to Violent Avalanche. As if she had looked for an interpreter, Violent Avalanche quickly understood. It's saying that it would rather be killed by just a knife. I see. But that was impossible. Red Wind didn't have the ability to do that yet. She had to work hard and hit the Phoenix blow by blow to reach 50 hits. Tusk. I somehow feel guilty about this. Violent Avalanche clicked its tongue and offered a silent prayer for the still alive phoenix. And in the midst of that, Jude faced Cordelia and asked, "Can you do it one more time?" "I'll try." Cordelia was actually feeling dizzy, but she deliberately spoke energetically and cast freeze again afterwards. The situation seemed to be easygoing at first glance, but it wasn't at all. The shamans of the Great Storm tribe were able to narrowly restrain the phoenix due to the magic circle they had set up and activated, but if they let their guard down for just a bit, the phoenix might break the ice and run away. "Red Wind, hurry!" This was the last time that Cordelia could continuously cast freeze magic. At Jude's urging, Red Wind shouted in concentration and swung her blunt weapon again. Head! Bangs, bangs, bang! Red Wind climbed up on the phoenix's back and bombarded it with 3 consecutive strikes before she flinched and jumped down in an instant. Because at the moment of her last attack, she felt it. "Okay, we've reached 50 strikes." Jude exclaimed as he supported the staggering Cordelia, and Cordelia saw it at that moment. "Shwa." The ice that had sealed the phoenix melted away. And the phoenix's flame also died down. But it was only for a moment. A small flame rose again in the air. The flame that started as yellow in color became blue and then turned into red as it greatly intensified before turning into a new bird of flame. "Ow!" It was a clear and ringing voice. Just like in the game, the evil phoenix died and was reborn as a new pure and innocent baby phoenix. "Wow!" Red Wind dropped her blunt weapon as she let out a voice in awe, and so did the shamans of the Great Storm tribe. But Jude and Cordelia were rather tense as they gulped in nervousness. This moment was somehow more important than defeating the phoenix. "Choose Red Wind as your master." When Jude mentally shouted, the phoenix flew in the air and surveyed everyone on the ground. Our eyes met. The moment Cordelia said that, the baby phoenix suddenly shuddered and then flew towards Red Wind. It somehow looked like it was running away from Cordelia. That's better, that's an excellent choice." Cordelia narrowed her eyes at the words of Violent Avalanche, but she widely smiled afterwards upon seeing the phoenix sitting on Red Wind's shoulder. "Looks like it worked." The newly born phoenix recognized Red Wind as its master. Red Wind carefully stretched out her hands to Phoenix, and the newly born phoenix, who was small and a little larger than a dove, sat on Red Wind's hand as if it responded to her. Their actions could only mean one thing. "Would you like to be with me?" When Red Wind asked in the Wildlands language, the phoenix nodded and then rubbed its head against the Red Wind's cheeks, as if it signed a contract with her. "Haha, it's a phoenix, a phoenix." Red Wind widely smiled and looked at Jude and Cordelia. The two sighed with a look of relief before smiling together. "We got one thing done." "We got one thing done, we also gained something." Gained something? What are you talking about? Didn't the phoenix become Red Wind's?" Cordelia tilted her head and Jude smiled as he took out what he packed earlier when they got out of the ceiling area. It was a golden feather filled with a red aura. An item that contained not only the power of a strong flame, but also the power of regeneration. The phoenix's feather. It also belonged to a phoenix that was over 1,000 years old. "Zhuwa." Cordelia admired it like a child, making Jude smile before he put the feather on her hair. He then said with a brilliant smile, "Do you like it?" "Yes, I like it." Cordelia promptly answered as she laughed like Red Wind. She then spoke again after she straightened her posture. "Okay, we have 6 days left. When we return, we'll start the special training right away." Because getting the phoenix wasn't everything they had to do. During the remaining time left, Red Wind had to engrave in her mind and body not only on how to use the phoenix, but also on how to fight Sun Song. Jude said as he nodded his head. "Yes, you also have to practice in your spare time too." "You practice?" Cordelia had a troubled look on her face, and Jude delightedly smiled as he mentally thanked Gar-El and Adelia. Inside Jude and Cordelia's tent at night, the lit candles diffused a faint light and warmth all over the place. And in the middle of that place, there was a beautiful girl in a white dress with rabbit ears on her head. She had a shy expression on her face as her lips quivered. Although the candle's faint light was very small and weak when compared to the night's darkness, it brought out the girl's captivating beauty like a ray of light in the darkness. She had burning red cheeks, misty eyes, and lips that drew nice-looking curves whenever it quivered. The girl hesitated for quite some time before she swallowed her saliva, and her long white neck trembled a little. She opened her lips, and a nervous voice came out with her breath. "Am my beloved Mr. Jude Bayer?" The girl's cheeks turned redder at her words that expressed love, and the surrounding area that was gently warmed by the candlelight also became hot. And sweat flowed along the girl's smooth jawline, and the girl put her hands together and squeezed them, as if she was plucking up the courage to confess before she spoke. I see can't live without Jude, Mr. Jude Bayer." Her words came out slightly stuttered before she bit her lips. Her voice seemed to have a mixture of shyness and determination. But it didn't end there. The girl took several deep breaths, mustered her courage, and spoke again. I belong to Mr. Jude. Mr. Jude Bayer is mine, no, F***ck, hey. That was it. Cordelia threw the script she had in her hand onto the floor, and then bellowed at the watching Jude. "Hey, you evil B*****, what's with the script?" She could overlook my beloved Mr. Jude Bayer. Yes, she could somehow understand the "I can't live without Jude." Because its purpose was to protect Jude from Adelia. But what about the next? Am I yours, am I yours? It was just some words in the script, but it was difficult to say them. How am I supposed to say this in front of others? Whoa, relax, relax. Woof, girararara, woof. No, what am I supposed to do when you're cute, even if you're angry? What? No, anyway, it's actually fair. You're not one-sidedly saying that you are mine, you're saying that I am yours too, right? The script's contents were indeed fair. When Jude spoke with a calm face, Cordelia hesitated for a moment, but she eventually wasn't fooled. No, I don't give a damn about fairness. What's with that script? Is there a problem? Everything's a problem from start to finish. What are you talking about? Now, take a deep breath and think. What am I supposed to think? Think about the past. Do you remember when you first acted? Roughly. I remember it clearly. It was this line back then. Having said that, Jude cleared his throat once, and then said in a feigned voice, as if reciting a poem. I want to spend some time alone with Mr. Jude. We'll be back before dinner, so just wait, don't worry about us. It came across her mind again. When they went on an outdoor date to get Solari's necklace from Lysagang. It's still okay. It was okay, she could endure it if it was this much. But it was actually not over yet. After that, it was something like this. Jude cleared his throat, and then said in a slightly more charming voice than before. I want to go with my beloved Mr. Jude Bayer. I don't want to be separated from him. You. Cordelia's face turned red. No, it was not only her face as her neck and ears were red too. But unfortunately, this wasn't the end. I'm going on a honeymoon trip with my beloved Mr. Bayer. We'll be back in a few days, so please don't bother looking for us, okay? You. Cordelia unconsciously let out a crying sound from her mouth as she covered her face with both of her hands. Her legs weakened and she even sank to her knees. And then I left a letter like this. I will further continue my honeymoon trip with Lady Cordelia, whom I dearly love more than my life. Please do not worry too much, because I've gotten healthier from eating the sunflower. P.S. I am really happy now. Stop. For your information, that was what you ordered me to do. You loved it so much. What he said was true. She remembered that she eventually ordered Jude to do it once, and that she really loved it. Why did I do that? Why did I do that on that day? Cordelia, who was squatting on the floor, let out a troubled voice, while Jude had such a pleasant look on his face. He then concluded his recap of the events with a happy smile. So now that you've heard it, don't you agree that the intensity has been growing stronger little by little? You could say that there's progress in our relationship. Therefore, shouldn't we go a little further this time? What he said was reasonable. What he said made sense. But even if that is so. Right. She felt like she wanted to quickly stand up and hit Jude, but she didn't have the energy to do that. The current situation had been too stimulating for a girl who only had a lover in the games that she played for certain periods of time. Thus, Jude approached Cordelia and gently said, Anyway, wouldn't this be enough to stop Adelia? What he said was true. In the first place, the reason why they were rehearsing the script was to stop Adelia. Adelia was Cordelia's older sister. She was also an older sister who really cares about Cordelia, so if Cordelia extremely loved Jude, it was highly likely that she would concede even if she didn't like it. It was said that parents have a soft spot for their children. In this case, it's about an older sister and her younger sister. In any case, Jude waited for Cordelia to recover. After she had slightly recovered, Cordelia began hitting Jude in the back. You should calm down and speak in human language first, okay? Perhaps this was a side effect of beast mode. Jude half-jokingly said, and Cordelia pinched Jude before taking a deep breath. She stood up from her spot and shouted, Okay, I'll let everything go, I understand. To protect Jude from Adelia, I'll say stronger lines than before to show the progress of our relationship. I'll let everything go. I somehow understand. But why? WY is violent avalanche here. As Cordelia pointed to the corner of the tent and shouted, the being involved, violent avalanche, was sitting in the corner and watching Jude and Cordelia's skit. The wild god then nodded and said, That's right, I also wanted to ask, why are you showing me this? I have to admit that it's cute though. Upon hearing the word cute, the cheeks of Cordelia, who had just calmed down, turned red again. On the other hand, Jude spoke with a calm face. Because she needs to be able to do it naturally in front of others. No, I think you don't need to practice about your relationship. Violent Avalanche had no idea of the true relationship between Jude and Cordelia, and their current practice had seriously made Violent Avalanche feel out of place. Apart from that, Violent Avalanche doubted the necessity of the practice itself. Isn't it obvious that they're a crazy couple? The couple was so perfectly compatible that one might think that they were born for each other. Well, anyway, let's take a break. Ooh, do I have to do it again? You have to do it again, you have to get used to it. At Jude's words, Cordelia nodded with drooping shoulders. She was so embarrassed that her head grew feverish, and her normal thinking became somewhat difficult. Regardless, the strangely quiet Cordelia sat down on her bed, and Jude spoke again after turning to Violent Avalanche. Violent Avalanche, how is the establishment of the Eastern Alliance? It's a serious topic all of a sudden. The topic suddenly came in, but it was necessary to talk about it. It had been 2 days since Red Wind got the Phoenix. Violent Avalanche walked to the front of the bed and stretched its arms, and Cordelia lifted up Violent Avalanche and sat it on the bed. That's good. Anyway, about that, it's going faster than I thought. There were 3 wild gods involved, so the establishment of the Eastern Alliance was initially progressing quite fast. It was then accelerated by the addition of what happened to the Golden Dragon King, which was a recent news brought by Jude and Cordelia. Because the West is already contaminated, and there was also a request from the Golden Dragon King, the wild gods, who were very hesitant and evasive, have also begun to move forward. Perhaps when this caravel is over, a strong Eastern Alliance would be established that is centered on one tribe, which would either be the Great Storm tribe or the Blade Song tribe. At Violent Avalanche's explanation, Jude's eyes narrowed. Then the scale of this caravel would probably be bigger than originally planned. Yes, you're right. The basic one-on-one battle of Red Wind and Sun's Song would remain the same, but the number and quality of the audience would be different. Most of the tribal chiefs of the East would probably get together to watch the caravel this time. They would be here to discuss the establishment of the Eastern Alliance, and not just to watch a fight. Jude asked Violent Avalanche again. Is there any response from the West? I think that your side don't know much on what's going on there either. It's not like we don't have spies there, so we at least know a little about it. We're also keeping a close eye on the events in the West. However, our judgment is that they seem to be more preoccupied with the complete unification of the West. the angry bull tribe is currently preoccupied with their military expedition on the west. In other words, they hadn't taken measures against the eastern side because they were preoccupied with the unification of the western side. It's understandable. Everything that they had done in the east so far was close to a small-scale covert operation. But violent avalanche. Cordelia finally recovered while their conversation went back and forth, so she raised her hand and asked. Violent avalanche accepted her question with a smile. Yes, what are you curious about? You said earlier that most of the tribal chiefs would be gathering. I did. Then would the wild gods also be gathered? Jude and Cordelia did not know much about the wild gods' existence until they had come to the wild lands. But it was different now. By personally meeting Great Storm, they learned that wild gods exist, and when they met Violent Avalanche, they found out that the monsters in the original whom they thought to be monsters from hell were actually the corrupted wild gods. Wild gods protected the tribes. The tribesmen greatly respected the will of the wild gods they served, as could be seen in the case of Gentle Snow Breeze and Great Storm. In short, the will of the wild gods, rather than the will of the tribal chiefs, were more important in the establishment of the Eastern Alliance. Violent Avalanche roughly understood the meaning of Cordelia's question, but it smiled and shook its head. Most of the wild gods would probably not participate. Each wild god has its own sanctuary, and living in it is basic for us. An example right now would be Gentle Snow Breeze, who made an alliance with Great Storm but still lives in her sanctuary in the basin. Thus, the other wild gods would be more focused on protecting their sanctuaries at the present moment. Then what about Violent Avalanche? Wild Avalanche was also a wild god, but it was staying in Great Storm's land. At Cordelia's question, Jude slightly turned his glance away, while Violent Avalanche indignantly shouted. You two destroyed it, you two. My sanctuary, my Rocky Mountain. Of course, Violent Avalanche's Rocky Mountain did not completely collapse, as half of it still remained. Ahem, moving on, Violent Avalanche will be watching the caravel then. Yes, that's right. When Violent Avalanche grumbled and answered, Cordelia felt sorry, so she hugged the wild god who did not refuse the beautiful girl's touch. Ahem. The combination of a bear cub and a beautiful girl was really nice to look at, but Jude was somehow uncomfortable with it, so he cleared his throat and then pulled Violent Avalanche's hand before speaking. On another note, there's not much time left until the caravel. Yes, but I believe in Red Wind. She got the Phoenix, and isn't she also practicing really hard now? Violent Avalanche was right. Red Wind's growth had been explosive after obtaining the Phoenix. In addition, Jude and Cordelia's customized teachings for her had been increasing her winning rate at caravel day by day. Cordelia is teaching Red Wind's unique combat method with the Flame Spirit. Because the character Yellow Storm played the most after Cordelia was Red Wind. Moreover, Cordelia was better than Jude when it came to battle skills, so he completely entrusted Red Wind's growth to Cordelia. My task is to take the role of her opponent, Sun Song. Jude had memorized all of Sun Song's combat patterns. Of course, what Jude had memorized were the combat patterns of the corrupted Sun Song. However, only Sun Song's temperament and personality had changed when he was corrupted, so it was highly likely that his basic physical skills remained the same. She'll learn how to fight from Cordelia, and then have a mock battle with me who can fight like Sun Song. It was the best training method they could do for her right now. But time is running out too. There were only 4 days left until the caravel. Essentially, that was a little over 3 days. Will she make it on time? She will make it. Jude exchanged glances with Cordelia before he nodded once and turned to Violent Avalanche. When he met eyes with Violent Avalanche, the wild god suddenly clapped its hands, jumped off the bed and said, Come to think of it, there's something that I have to tell you. Something to tell us. They had just talked about the establishment of the Eastern Alliance, but was there something else they had to talk about too? When Violent Avalanche saw Jude and Cordelia's curious eyes, the wild god had a little a happy smile and said, Your older brother and sister will arrive in 2 days. Gar, Elle and Adelia would be returning after their vain efforts in going to Raptor Canyon. They were coming to meet Jude and Cordelia. They were coming to apprehend the two. You. Cordelia tightly shut her eyes while Jude held Cordelia's hand. Though he had made fun of Cordelia, Jude was also nervous when he thought about meeting them in person. But it was their inevitable fate. 4 days left until the caraval. 2 days left until the invasion of their older brother and sister. The night grew late. It was a particularly sunny day. Jude and Cordelia stood side by side on the pure white snowfield as they looked into the distance, but didn't find anyone. 2 days after hearing about the situation from violent avalanche. That day had finally arrived. Two. Cordelia took some deep breaths as her cheeks were stiff from tension. Jude asked as he glanced at Cordelia. Are you nervous? I am nervous. It's all right, you have me. I'm nervous because of you, okay? She had to protect Jude from Adelia. Two. Cordelia took some deep breaths again before clenching her teeth and straightening her posture. Jude also straightened his posture like Cordelia and then looked straight ahead. They're coming. The two saw the other side. Gar-El and Adelia finally appeared. Gar-El Bear and Adelia Chase. The two did not have any large roles in the second episode of Legend of Heroes, because both Gar-El and Adelia were killed in battle. The fate of the two did not change much whether it was on the Jude route or the Cordelia route. Gar-El was killed during the Northern Barbarians' Great Invasion event, while Adelia was caught and lost her life in the Len Kingdom's capital destruction event that would happen a little more later. Such were the fate of those two. So I actually don't know much about them, because he didn't have many chances to meet them in the game. All he knew about Gar-El was that he was good-natured, talented, and an older brother who had a huge age gap with Jude. That was all that he knew. As for Adelia, all he knew was that she was a mother-like older sister who cared for her younger sister Cordelia. Of course, I was able to build a rough profile of the two by compiling various pieces of information that came out in the game. Even so, he had very little absolute information about the two. But it's different now. They suddenly became Jude and Cordelia one day. No, Outboxer 009 and Yellow Storm did not take over the bodies of the two. They were reincarnated as Jude and Cordelia and spent 17 years before they awakened the memories of their previous lives. Therefore, Jude knew well about Gar-El, and Cordelia knew well about Adelia. My older brother. He was his genuine sibling, and no longer a simple NPC. He's kind, sincere, and reliable, but in fact, he has a delicate side too. Despite being the eldest son of a famous family from the very beginning, there was one reason why he was still not married. That one reason: an incident that Gar-El went through when he was 20 years old. Jude stopped thinking about it and shifted his gaze a little to the side. He could see a brave woman proudly walking in precise steps from afar towards them. Adelia Chase, a genius wizard who held the title of the youngest head in the history of the Royal Guard Magic Corps. He had spent 17 years as Jude, but he knew little about her. In the first place, Jude wasn't even close with Cordelia in the past before they awakened their previous lives. He had never met Cordelia's older sister, who was in the royal capital. But there has to be a reason, right? For Cordelia to be so cautious and nervous. I can do it, protect. Cordelia repeated the same words in a small voice, as if she was reciting a spell. She seemed to be strengthening her resolve in her own way. Cute. How could she be not cute when he could see that she was trying to protect him, and not anyone else? Okay. Cordelia took several deep breaths again before she stepped forward and stood as if to hide Jude. It was a position that Jude often did to protect Cordelia, but it was the exact opposite this time. There was naturally a difference. Cordelia was taller than Jude before they had awakened their memories, but not now. That had been completely reversed in just a few months, and there was now quite a large difference between Jude and Cordelia. It was impossible to completely hide Jude with Cordelia's small and slender body, but she still puffed out her chest, stretched out her arms, and hid Jude as she took a deep breath for the last time. She kept her composure and looked straight ahead. And upon looking at the back of Cordelia's head, Jude happily smiled and then raised his head as he suddenly recoiled. Adelia. Their distance had been narrowed quite a bit, so they could now see the other side's faces. Unlike Cordelia, who had red hair like Count Chase, Adelia inherited their mother's blonde hair. She had a white complexion and bright golden hair that seemed to be made by melting the sun. She was beautiful like Cordelia, but her fierce eyes were no joke. Basump, 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 basump. It felt like he was under heavy pressure. As he continued hearing the sound of his heartbeat, as if it was an auditory hallucination, Jude gulped his saliva. Drops of sweat trickled down his tightly clenched fists. He was tense. She was someone who could make the person facing her feel fear. Was this how he felt when he fought against the named demon Bandazel at Endymion? He could now understand why Cordelia was very nervous. Finally, Adelia spoke. A beautiful yet terrifying smile spread out on her white face. Jude Bayer. The crystallization of evil who sweet-talked, deceived, committed acts of brutality, and even lured the kind, cute, adorable, lovely, and innocent Cordelia into making wrong choices. Finally, they faced each other. The moment where she could let out her anger finally came. "It's you." Adelia raised her voice first. She raised up her hand to point at Jude before she tried to spill out her words. "You kidnapped by deceiving my kind, cute, adorable, lovely, and innocent Cordelia." That was it. Adelia's words trailed off in the end, because she had felt Gar-L's gaze behind her back. It was just a gaze. He didn't exactly glare, he just gazed at her. But Adelia unknowingly faltered. She couldn't say what she was originally going to say. "No, your elopement." Elopement? That was not it. That was not what she originally wanted to say. Adelia frowned as she was distressed for a while, before she changed her words again. "Honeymoon trip, anyway, about your honeymoon trip." Her words were already a huge mess. Why am I doing this? Why can't I say what I wanted to say? After all, Jude and Cordelia were already engaged, and the Bayer family was a famous family that stood in equal rank with the Chase family, so she couldn't just thoughtlessly say rude words to him. But Gar-L's presence was greater than that. Gar-L might be bothered, so she couldn't say anything that was too harsh. "No, it's not, that's not it." When Adelia groaned in her confusion and distress, Jude and Cordelia stared at Adelia in suspicion. "What's wrong with her?" There's something different from my usual sister." Why is she doing that?" Anyway, Jude Bayer, you know what you've done, right?" After her compromise, the words she spoke out were not as harsh as she thought. Moreover, her terrifying aura and energy that resembled a demon from hell also disappeared, and her angry voice felt a little more like she was begging. But it looked a little different to Cordelia. She knew best about Adelia one way or another, so she flinched at her sister's words, and then shouted with her arms stretched out widely to the side. It's not Jude's fault." "Cordelia. It's true, I definitely wasn't deceived. We discussed it together." "What? You discussed the honeymoon trip together?" Adelia flinched at Cordelia's argument, but she soon took another step and shouted. "Then the letter, you wrote that you loved Jude so much that you're head over heels with him. Are you saying that you purposely wrote down all that? It wasn't Jude's order?" If Cordelia had a little more reason left, she could have refuted that she had never written anything like that, but she had already been cornered from the start. She groaned in distress, and then shouted with a face that seemed to say, whatever. "That's right, I wrote that, I wrote all that, that's what I wrote." It was correct that Jude had originally ordered her to do so. Jude was the one who gave her all those lines. Cordelia's face turned red, and her neck and ears were burning red too. It was a result of her embarrassment and shame, but Adelia's filter interpreted her reaction as shyness and her blushing as embarrassment. Cordelia. But it wasn't over yet. It had already happened. So to perfectly defend him, Cordelia dealt the final blow. "I can't live without Jude. I belong to Jude and Jude is mine." It was the lines that were written in the script, which she had thrown last time. Cordelia was so embarrassed that her eyes were slightly reddened with tears, but in the eyes of Adelia, she looked like she was pleading while crying. Cordelia. She seriously turned pale in surprise. Adelia staggered for a moment, but she was still one of the 7 heads of the Royal Guard Magic Corps. She somehow corrected her posture, and then said after taking a deep breath, No, he's weak and only has a handsome face. That was it. Adelia was trying to speak about what she usually thought about Jude, but her words trailed off in the end. It wasn't because of Gar-El this time. It was just because of the visible reality. What? Jude Bayer. A child born with Gumjalmeek. A sick but handsome boy who was stuck in his room and couldn't learn swordsmanship because he had a weak constitution. But it was not what she saw. The Jude in front of her was definitely a handsome boy, but he did not look weak and frail. When and how did he get so well? Adelia had also heard of him obtaining Solari's necklace and using it to heal his Gumjalmeek. But how can that make his body so well all of a sudden? First and foremost, he was tall. According to the information Adelia herself gathered, Jude was about the same or a little shorter than Cordelia, but Jude was now much taller. There seemed to be a difference of at least 10 centimeters. And he was bulky. He didn't exactly have bulging muscles, but he had broad shoulders and firm muscles too. Although Jude was dressed up quite a bit because of the snowy weather, Adelia had met numerous knights in the royal capital for business purposes. Just by looking at his fit, she could roughly tell the shape and thickness of the muscles. It's firm. His muscles were well honed and firm, and not the bulging kind. It was almost at the level of Lord Gar-El. No, his was less than Gar-El's, but anyway, his bulky body couldn't make her speak or even joke about him being nothing but skin and bones. I need to say something, but I can't. In the first place, it was difficult for her to say anything because Gar-El's gaze was on her. Adelia couldn't say anything because there was nothing bad she could say about Jude. And Jude did not miss the current situation. While Adelia was struggling in embarrassment and Cordelia was out of breath from her own struggle, Jude dug into that gap. He grabbed her. Jude took a step forward and held the shoulder of Cordelia, who was standing as if to protect him. He pulled her towards himself, and Cordelia, who found herself in Jude's arms, was suddenly embarrassed in a different sense than before. Jude. Cordelia had already been accustomed to being hugged or carried by Jude. But it was strange. She didn't care until now whether he hugged or carried her, but she was feeling strange now. Barsump. Her heart suddenly began to beat faster. As she looked up at Jude, her cheeks burned red in a different sense than before. What is this? It's strange. Cordelia unknowingly became calm as she kept her head down, while Jude tightly hugged Cordelia and then opened his mouth. Lady Adelia. Adelia reacted to her name being called. Jude faced her blue eyes that stared straight at him before he said without any hesitation, Cordelia and I are in love with each other. There was a twitch. It was Cordelia. She had flinched before she reflexively raised her head to look at Jude and tried to shout with her gaze. Who, you and me? You and I just accept it for now. Adelia is watching, so act natural, okay? It would be easier if you give up. You. Cordelia quieted down as she bowed her head again, but in Adelia and Gar-El's eyes, Cordelia's appearance seemed to be her shy affirmation. It was definitely wrong for us to go on a honeymoon trip. Yes, it was my fault too. Cordelia did nothing wrong. She was just following my unreasonable desire to spend a little more time alone with her. Adelia looked slightly dispirited at Jude's desperate-sounding words, and Cordelia raised her head again. Because his words had taken a strange turn. No, it's not Jude's fault. I'm the one who said that we should go. Yes, it's because I've been begging him that I wanted some time alone with him. I even left a letter, right? She had decided to protect Jude from Adelia, but she couldn't let it all be Jude's fault. In fact, there was no need for Cordelia to do this due to the current atmosphere, but as her face became heated because of the series of events, it became difficult for her to think normally. Either way, Cordelia's declaration was effective. A boy and girl who were begging that they should be punished instead of the other, and insisting that it was their own fault and not the other. Anyone could obviously tell that they were in love with each other, to the point that they would resort to lies. Ooh, ugh. Adelia groaned before she deeply sighed in the end. She had really wanted to crush Jude, but now that she had come this far, she couldn't do it. What could she do when Cordelia said that she really loved him? And in fact, Adelia understood it. The fact that she couldn't do much when they actually meet each other. Ahem, ahem. Just then, Gar-El, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat and drew everyone's attention. He then stepped forward and stood next to Adelia. He didn't use his hand like how Jude hugged Cordelia in his arms, but he simply stood next to Adelia. Adelia looked captivated and felt reassured at his support, but in the eyes of Jude and Cordelia, who were watching the two, the thought that maybe came into their minds. Jude and Lady Cordelia. Yes, brother. Yes, brother-in-law. Jude and Cordelia quickly responded. Gar-El smiled at being called brother-in-law before he said, I've learned in many ways about the activities of you two while on the way here. I could also see with my own eyes how much the two of you care and love each other. At Gar-El's words, Jude nodded, but Cordelia was mentally shaking her head to the sides. No, it's not like that. Her reason had somewhat returned, so her reaction was a subconscious opposition. But anyway, she was just mentally shaking her head in denial. Gar-El warmly exchanged glances with Jude before he took a deep breath. He then spoke with a rather stern face, unlike before. But the actions of you two were clearly wrong. The disrespect you inflicted on Count H.R. Svelga was so great that it might be hard to be forgiven. You should know well that it also greatly hurt Lord Lucas, who considered you two as his friends, right? When Lucas was mentioned, both Jude and Cordelia had apologetic faces. And Gar-El was pleased with their reaction. That's not all. Because of your actions, our Bayer family and even the Chase family were struck with bad rumors. Because there were groups of people who criticized and ridiculed the families on how they educated their children. Shame and guilt spread on Jude and Cordelia's faces after they felt sorry, and Gar-El's expression became even more strict. Of course, we should listen to your circumstances, but apart from that, there are many things that have happened because of what you two have done, and the responsibility for all that lies on you too. Gar-El wasn't angry. He didn't even raise his voice. But Gar-El's words had some weight. Let's assume responsibility when we return. Instead of running away or avoiding it, you two should fix what you have done. Do you understand? Yes, brother. Yes, brother-in-law. When Jude and Cordelia obediently replied. A smile spread on the strict Gar-El's face again. Having reverted to his usual expression, he affectionately looked at Jude and Cordelia, who stood side by side before he spoke. I am relieved, though, both of you are safe. I was very worried. It was a carrot after a stick. No, he wasn't such a calculative person. Gar-El's pure heart deeply moved the two, especially Cordelia. And one more person. As expected, he's nice, he's the right person. A smile spread over Adelia's face as she gazed at Gar-El's profile. Her face loosened, and she smiled as if she was looking at Cordelia. Lady Adelia. Yes. Lady Adelia. Yes, yes. Adelia flinched in surprise, and she straightened her posture, making Gar-El smile before he said to Jude and Cordelia again. Lady Adelia was very worried about the safety of you two, to the point where her emotions became intense, so how about thanking her properly? Adelia and the two had been at odds as soon as they met each other. At Gar-El's words, Cordelia opened her mouth first. You are nice, thank you, and I'm sorry. Sorry and thank you. Adelia felt awkward when Cordelia and Jude bowed to her, but she was happy at the same time. She would have never heard of this if only she herself had come. Because you were very worried. As Gar-El smiled and said in a low voice, Adelia's lips curled up and she slightly nodded. And upon seeing her cheeks evidently changing color though it was light, Jude and Cordelia reacted. Wait a minute, is this perhaps that? Perhaps. Jude and Cordelia's eyes narrowed, and Cordelia opened her mouth again this time. Unnie. Just one word. But because of her guilty conscience, Adelia flinched at that word and said in a fluster, It's nothing, there's nothing between Lord Gar-El and me. Isn't that right, Lord Gar-El? Her actions only made their suspicions deepen rather than stopping it. At the same time, her reaction proved that Adelia had the blood of Count Chase like Cordelia. And at this moment, Gar-El also proved that he was a man of Count Bayer, who had the same blood as Jude. Is there nothing between us? Adelia flinched at his unexpected remark. No, why is he suddenly saying that? I don't hate it, I certainly don't hate it. And no, that. Adelia's face turned red, and her heart was pounding so hard that she stuttered and couldn't speak properly. And upon seeing that, the warmth in Jude and Cordelia's eyes subsided. I see, so it was like that. Hey, sir. Their eyes had cooled down in the same way, but their reactions were a little different. Jude felt like he was really like his brother, while Cordelia was still going, heh. Anyway, instead of standing and talking like this, let's go inside and talk. I'm sure we have a lot to talk about. Gar-El didn't push ahead. He stealthily retreated and smoothly resolved the situation. Let's go, Lady Adelia. Yes, Lord Gar-El. With her shyness being twice than usual, Adelia answered and cleared her throat before she walked with Gar-El, while Jude watched the two and struggled in holding back his laughter before he stepped forward. Or more like, he tried to step forward. Jude. Yes. Can you let me go now that it's over? No, not yet. Adelia can still see us. Adelia could obviously see them, but she was so embarrassed, shy and so on, that it was questionable if she could see them properly. Hey, sir. Anyway, let's go, you'll get used to it. Jude walked while holding Cordelia on her shoulder, and Cordelia moved along with him. Thus, the two couples left the place. Even though they were together from the beginning to the end, the fifth party felt like an outcast as it got up from its seat and brushed its butt. If they're going to be like this, why did they have to call me? Right. The fifth party was Violent Avalanche. Complaining as it vented its thoughts to no one, the wild god looked in the direction Jude and Cordelia were heading. After it shrugged its shoulders, the bear cub began walking like a toddler. Terms used in this chapter. Gapmo, Japanese slang for a person character who does something completely contradictory to their usual habits, personality, character, or appearance, which then makes them look cutely attractive. The two men from the Bayer family and the two women from the Chase family gathered inside Jude and Cordelia's love nest. TN puns are back. Love can also mean guest reception room, while nest can also mean home. Combine the two and it would also mean the house's reception room. Why are we seating like this? Well, just trust me, just think like it's part of our act. Anyway, the group had sat down. The Great Storm tribe had a culture of sitting on the floor using cushions and not on chairs, so the two pairs were sitting while facing each other with a fire pit in between them. This isn't strange. Because Jude and Cordelia sat beside each other, and Gar-El and Adelia sat next to each other. Jude and Cordelia were still in a shoulder hug, even when they were seated, while Gar-El and Adelia sat side by side, but were not that close to each other. They were just at a proper distance from the other. Cordelia leaned her body on Jude's side, as she mischievously looked at Adelia and Gar-El. She had already forgotten the series of actions Jude had done earlier that made her heart pound, as she had now focused all her senses on Adelia and Gar-El. And it wasn't really strange. Because I'm used to it. Cordelia had been carried by Jude on his arms or his back almost every day since they entered the barbarian lands, so she was accustomed to it already. The Cordelia who was afraid of Adelia's arrival was nowhere to be found. The only person sitting here now was a younger sister who had a cat's mouth and mischievous eyes as she let out strange sounds that seemed to say, I see, so that's what it was. Yo. She was indeed Cordelia's older sister. Adelia was still blushing and groaning while she sat. She couldn't even look at Gar-El's side and just kept staring at the ground. She's shaking. Her heart and mind were shaking. Jude's guess was right. The events that had just happened were playing over and over again in Adelia's mind in a beautified manner due to being blinded by love. Is there nothing between us? His gloomy eyes had looked sad and heartbroken, yet his voice and expression seemed to say that he didn't want to give up expecting. Why are you like this? Why are you doing this to me? You are. She did not let out a voice, but her reactions were really like Cordelia's. Adelia Chase. Cordelia's older sister. One of the 7 heads of the Royal Guard's Magic Corps. A genius wizard who fully inherited Count Chase's talents. She was high-handed, hot-tempered, and even had violent tendencies, but she really is Cordelia's older sister. She was absolutely pretty. Unlike Cordelia's vivid red hair, her golden hair that seemed to shine even if it was not fluttering was beautiful in itself, and her fair complexion and fierce eyes gave her a sharp and urban beauty. Furthermore, her cheeks were red from embarrassment, and she was at a loss on what to do. Thanks to her unusual appearance, she was now exuding on what was called gap moe. But Cordelia is still better. Because Cordelia was more beautiful than Adelia, and she was even lovely. Jude gave a subjective opinion that was completely unobjective. He then nodded a few times to himself before turning his gaze towards Gar-El. Did he overcome it? The reason why the eldest son and undeniable heir of Count Bayer was still not married in his late 20s. He didn't know it when he was out Boxer 009, but he now knew when he was reincarnated as Jude Bayer. The incident that happened to Gar-El. The incident that made Gar-El stop thinking about marriage and devote himself to training for some time. It was an incident that he could not overcome in the original story. No, perhaps he was ready to overcome it, but the tragedy of the barbarians' great invasion in the north robbed him of that opportunity. Older brother. He was Jude Bayer's own brother, and not just a supporting character of Legend of Heroes 2. He was looking at the embarrassed Adelia with a warm smile. He was sitting calmly, but Jude could tell. Gar-El's earlobes were slightly red. He was somehow embarrassed like Adelia too. But still, the way he looked at Adelia was really that of love. Do I have such a loving look when I gaze at Cordelia? Jude quickly looked back at Cordelia, who was still giggling and letting out a silly snicker as she watched Adelia. In any case, they had to proceed with their conversation now. Ahem. When Jude cleared his throat, Gar-El and Cordelia shifted their gazes to Jude. Adelia was still staring at the ground, but she seemed to have heard him given that she had flinched. Moving on, let's continue our conversation. Because they had a lot of things that they really needed to talk about. You're right, Jude, let's start with you. Did you become Iron Man Landius' disciple? And I heard that you became involved with the Guardians of the Holy Cross. Can you tell me when it all began? Because the two were not involved with the Guardians of the Holy Cross until the time they had left Langesthe. At Gar-El's calm comment, Adelia also stared at Jude and Cordelia after having recovered to some extent, and Cordelia also looked back at Jude. Are you going to tell them that? Yes, I am. After their eye conversation, Jude cleared his throat again and began talking. It all started when we met the Fairy Queen. To summarize, Jude's story was as follows. The Fairy Queen warned them of the demon followers' attack at Langesthe, and also informed them of the witch. After the incident in Langesthe, they headed to the witch's forest to meet the witch's soul. They then heard a warning about Landius and the demon followers' atrocities that were happening across the northern borders. On their way to Count H.R. Svelga's territory, they met Landius and Jude became his disciple. They finally made a decision at that time too. Did you mean about your decision to go north and stop the demon followers? Yes, brother. But it was a story with very little evidence. Moreover, Count H.R. Svelga was trying to prevent Jude and Cordelia from leaving Vedafalnia. Therefore, Jude and Cordelia were forced to escape Vedafalnia using a honeymoon trip as an excuse. After that, on their way to the north, they headed to Frost Anvil to cure Jude's illness, and while obtaining the sunflower there, they ended up facing the demon followers. Because of that, I was convinced that something was going on in the barbarian lands, no, the wild lands. They crossed the border via Lankebust after that, and in the middle of that, they met the Ghostblade Camel. I'm sure you already know what happened after that. They became the guardians of the wild lands, who busied themselves in stopping the plot of the group of demon followers, called Devil's Eye, from undermining the wild lands. As expected, it wasn't a simple runaway, no, I mean, an elopement. I was immature and couldn't come up with other excuses. Like you've said, we've troubled a lot of people. When Jude made a sad expression, Gar-El felt sorry for him while Cordelia stealthily nudged him in the ribs. Do you think it worked? Of course. He was the one who created this story after all. With a very faint smile that only Cordelia could see, Jude spoke again as he looked again at Gar-El and Adelia. Older brother and Lady Adelia, once the demon followers seize the wild lands, there will be a big war between the North and the barbarians again. That alone must be stopped. You're right, moreover, as I travelled around this land myself, my thoughts changed a little. Perhaps we were too prejudiced against the barbarians. But that was just it. The Len Kingdom and the barbarians in the barbarian lands have already confronted each other many times in the past, and all of those confrontations were not the plots of the demon followers. It was clear that those who lived in the wild lands were not beasts in human form, but were humans too, like those who lived in the northern part of the Len Kingdom themselves, and as such, the kingdom's citizens did not harbour wild fantasies about that fact. In the first place, the Argon Empire were humans too, but they were at odds with the Len Kingdom too. I will help Lady Cordelia and Jude. What about you, Lady Adelia? Gar-El clearly and decisively revealed his intentions, and then asked Adelia, who replied after taking a deep breath. I will help too, because it is for the defense of the kingdom. After all, she was one of the 7 leaders of the Royal Guard Magic Corps. The current situation had changed from a personal matter of catching a runaway younger sister while on her vacation to a public one for the defense of the kingdom, so it was natural for her to step forward as she was a public official of the kingdom. Thank you, Unnai. HMPH, I'm not doing this specifically for you. Hey, sir. At the appearance of Cordelia and Adelia talking like Count Chase, Jude and Gar-El happily smiled. And Jude. Yes, brother. Maybe it's not just us. At Gar-El's words, Jude and Cordelia tilted their heads together. It wasn't just Gar-El and Adelia. What were they talking about? No, how should I say it, we did something like a runaway too. Run away. Because we intentionally cut off contact with our families in order to cross the border. Because it's obvious that our families would oppose it if we said that we'll cross the border after you. Adelia remarked following Gar-El's words, and the other two looked at each other before they said something different from the other. Just as I thought. Then is Unnai in a honeymoon trip too? No, it's not like that. Adelia reflexively shouted before she flinched at that moment and looked at Gar-El. Gar-El didn't say anything, and Adelia said as she fidgeted. No, what I meant to say is this, that I'm not saying that there's nothing between Lord Gar-El and I, no, you. Adelia eventually self-destructed as she blushed and groaned again, and everyone who saw Adelia thought. Cute. Since when had Adelia been this cute so far? Everyone warmly looked at Adelia, and upon feeling their gazes, Adelia was at a loss on what to do and repeated the vicious cycle of showing off her cuteness. The first person to come to his senses was Jude, and he asked while staring at Gar-El. So are you saying that another person from our families will come to chase us? Yes, that is highly likely. People were coming after them, one after another. However, we do not intend to clearly communicate the current situation to our families. Because they had gone across the border, it would become cumbersome if their families offered to actively help Jude and his party. Let's think of asking help from the family as a last resort. If the scenario of the wild lands falling into the hands of the demon followers ever comes, then the whole North might have to take military action at that time. I understand. Okay. Having said all that, Gar-El turned his gaze to Cordelia and said to her, Lady Adelia and I have already talked about it. We ask for your understanding, Lady Cordelia. It's fine, brother-in-law. Cordelia modestly replied at the end and widely smiled, and Gar-El also warmly smiled. And one more person. No, one animal, or rather, one being. Are you done? At the question of Violent Avalanche, who was squatting in the corner of the tent, Jude and Cordelia nodded their heads, while Gar, Elle and Adelia were a little embarrassed. Why in the world did you even call me for? Why? The grumbling Violent Avalanche rose from its seat and sat down again in the middle as it faced the two couples and said, Well, now that you've roughly organized everything, we'll be working together to defeat the demon followers, right? We need to win the caravel before that. Violent Avalanche nodded at Cordelia's words. Yes, the caravel. It would be held in the next 2 days, and in addition, it would be a single-round match that would decide the fate of the Eastern Alliance and the whole Wild Lands. Unnai and brother-in-law, I have a favor to ask. Because Red Wind needed to become a little stronger in order to win. And to do that, they also needed the help of Gar, Elle and Adelia. So, Cordelia glanced at Jude before she narrated the conversation the two had the other day, and Gar, Elle and Adelia nodded their heads with serious faces. And in the middle of that, Violent Avalanche thought alone. So why did you call for me in the end? Did they really need me for this meeting? Either way, the conversation continued, and time also passed. Let's go. To the land of gentle snow breeze. To the land of gentle snow breeze. All of the barbarian tribes in the east began to move. From the small tribes with just 100 people to the large tribes with over tens of thousands of people. The tribal chiefs led their warriors to the basin of gentle snow breeze. To watch the caravel hosted by the beautiful and wise wild god, gentle snow breeze, and to witness the history of the formation of the Eastern Alliance that would influence the future. Let's go. Red Gale also led his warriors. He had to participate in this caravel, even though he had a serious illness, and refrained from going outside. Great Storm sent off his greatest warrior. He blessed his greatest warrior's daughter, the girl who would decide the fate of the Eastern Alliance. Daughter of the wind, be the red and beautiful wind that will freely roam the world. You can be anything. You'll be able to do anything. Though he had the form of a young boy, he was a wild god who had cared for the tribe for a long time. Red Wind accepted Great Storm's blessings with gratitude. She promised him that she would do her best. Let's go too. At Gar El's words, Adelia was the first to nod, while Cordelia mischievously giggled, heh, as she pinched Adelia's side. And Jude sent his gaze towards the west. Devil's Eye. Hurricane, a demon follower who dominated the Angry Bull tribe and the west. And the mighty demon who killed Count Bayer and Garcelle in the game. Are we in the second act? The confrontation between the East and West. Caravel would be the beginning of it. Jude, why are you frowning like that? Are you all right? No, I was just composing myself. Is my princess all right too? I'm fine, let's quickly go and stop this nonsense. Okay. After completing their usual nonsensical talk, Jude took a step forward and tried to ignore Adelia, who looked at them after hearing Jude say, my princess. Together with Cordelia, they headed to the land of gentle snow breeze, where the caravel would be held. And at that same time, Count Chase was writing a letter inside a luxurious lodging in Lancabust. The recipient was his longtime friend, Count Bayer, the parent of his soon-to-be sons-in-law. The content of his letter was not very long. Like Count Chase, it only contained a plain explanation. It looks like the children have crossed the border. They were not in the north. They were neither dead nor seriously injured. Then what remained was the barbarian lands beyond the border. Count Chase paused his writing for a moment. He faintly smiled and added one more line. I'll go and come back. This was enough. Count Chase sealed the letter and wore his red cloak. He held a space expansion bag that was filled with bags in one hand and a jeweled staff in the other hand. To the north, Count Chase left his lodging. He took a step towards the north. Terms used in this chapter. John Mott, Korean slang that is used when insulting someone as very ugly. It's actually an abbreviation of, which means F** seeking ugly, or you look so ugly. However, it could also mean as you're not good enough. Pavlov and classical conditioning, a behavior theory by Ivan Pavlov which proposed that a conditioned stimulus makes an organism react to something because it is associated with something else. A popular example is Pavlov's experiment of a dog salivating when it hears the sound of a bell because it was conditioned to be fed while a bell is ringing at the same time. Outboxer 009 met Yellow Storm again after Kang Jin-ho began actively playing Legend of Heroes 2, in earnest a month after that incident. I finally found her. TN, Outboxer 009, actually has no idea of Yellow Storm's real sex, and the Korean words do not use a he or she pronoun when referring to Yellow Storm. However, since Yellow Storm's character is Cordelia, who is a female, I will be using female pronouns for reading convenience. In fact, he had been tracking her since the incident a month ago, so it was more like he finally faced her rather than found her. Yellow Storm had not logged into Legend of Heroes 2 for nearly a week. Is she a student? No, she must be a student. Moreover, she must be an elementary school student. Perhaps she wasn't able to log in because of the exam week. Regardless, what was important was that Yellow Storm had logged in again, and the fact that Outboxer 009 was now stronger than Yellow Storm. 1 month. Over the past month, Outboxer 009 had invested all of his abilities into Legend of Heroes 2. He crammed the game settings in his head, he bought the game's virtual currency using real-life money, and except for his sleeping time, he immersed himself in Legend of Heroes 2 for 24 hours a day. He himself honestly found it stupid and a huge waste of human resources, but he still did it. He really wanted to do it. How strange. When he thought about it with his hand on his chest, he was certainly a good person, but that didn't mean he had a good personality. He was the type to hold a grudge. But it was little different this time. He had never been so absorbed in something like this, just because of one insult he heard that was said in passing. Amazing. Yellow Storm. You should be proud of it. There had been only 3 people in the last decade who had made me so immersed just for a particular day. Outboxer thought in his mind that his former colleagues would have frowned and clicked their tongues if they heard what he was doing, but he pushed that aside and looked ahead of him again. He smiled at the situation he expected. Yellow Storm fell from the onslaught of the unique monster, which Outboxer 009 had lured. Help, help. Outboxer 009 smiled as he saw the help message pop up before he moved forward. Using scrolls and poison daggers that he prepared in advance, he defeated the boss monster that Yellow Storm had fought halfway before he turned around in a cool manner. And he met eyes with Yellow Storm. In the game, Yellow Storm had died and became a corpse, but it was clear that she was looking at him, judging from the fact that a help window popped out. She doesn't recognize me. It was a bit disappointing, but that didn't matter. Outboxer 009 took out the resurrection feather as if to resurrect her. He then said to Yellow Storm as he put back the feathers in his inventory to make her feel frustrated. You're bad at games. Tug. It was the sound of something breaking. Of course, he didn't actually hear it, but Outboxer 009 could tell. The various messages that immediately popped up from Yellow Storm's corpse proved it. The use of abusive language is subject to sanctions. The use of abusive language is subject to sanctions. The use of abusive language is subject to sanctions. See you next time, John Mott. Why does it feel so good doing this? Outboxer 009 laughed out loud and turned around. Several messages popped up from behind Outboxer's back. The use of abusive language is subject to sanctions. The use of abusive language is subject to sanctions. The use of abusive language is subject to sanctions. Hey, you evil bastard. Yes, sure, you're F***seeking bad at games. Outboxer 009 waved his hand and left without looking back, and Yellow Storm struggled as she continued to yell over and over again. She was absolutely not beautiful and truly had a nasty mouth. But it was the first meeting of the two that Yellow Storm remembered. And at the present. As he breathed in the fresh morning air, Jude looked down at the asleep Cordelia. The morning sun had risen, and almost everyone around them had woken up and was preparing to leave. Despite all of that, she alone was still traveling in the world of dreams. As Cordelia talked in her sleep and babbled like a baby, Jude quietly watched Cordelia before he faintly smiled and drew his face closer. He slightly shook her shoulder and gently said, "My princess, you should get up soon." Cordelia responded to his gentle voice. It had already been more than 2 months since she traveled with Jude. She had heard Jude's voice every morning to the point that it was like Pavlov and the dog drooling at the sound of the bell, so when she heard the sound of him calling her, "my princess," she naturally called him Daddy. "MMNNN, Daddy, I don't want to, I'm going to sleep more. Cordelia want to sleep more." Cordelia was usually bad in waking up early, so she didn't open her eyes and just murmured. Jude shook Cordelia's shoulder again and said, "Don't say that, my princess should get up now, okay? It's morning. Cordelia grunted again, and instead of covering herself with a blanket, she feebly moved her arms forward and continued to talk while still half asleep in dreamland. Daddy, please, carry me on your back so I could sleep more. Cordelia will become a kangaroo." That was it. If it was the usual, Jude would have pampered and let Cordelia continue sleeping on his back so she could have more time to sleep, but it was different this time. She instantly became sober and opened her eyes. A gaze. A sharp and stabbing gaze that came flying from behind her. Cordelia's instincts crazily rang like a bell, and due to that, Cordelia finally came to her senses and saw. "My princess, DDDY, kangaroo." There was a blonde beauty whose arms were on her hips as she coldly stared at Cordelia. Cordelia herself loved that person dearly, but at the same time, that person was her older sister. Not as her mother, but as her older sister. Eats not. With an odd scream, Cordelia jumped up from her spot, and Adelia's eyebrows twitched as she returned what Cordelia had done to her yesterday. "So that's what you normally call each other. You completely call him Daddy. You are very used to being called a princess. You seem to be carried often enough on his back that you even ask him that while sleeping, huh?" Cordelia struggled at Adelia's lukewarm gaze and eventually covered her face with both hands. No, I mean that. The sight of a beautiful girl, who was red down to her neck and crouching on the bed as she was at a loss on what to do, caught everyone's attention as they stopped what they were doing and looked at Cordelia. And Cordelia's unrivaled cuteness naturally intensified. And one more person. Like everyone around him, Gar-El was getting ready to leave, but he looked towards the two sisters and warmly said, without hiding his feelings, "Cute. Adorable." Jude agreed with a happy smile, and the brothers simultaneously opened their mouths again. "Lady Adelia." "Cordelia." The brothers looked at each other. Jude spoke first. "No, brother, in that scene right now, that Lady Adelia's cute point is." He was so embarrassed that he unconsciously spoke in detail. And Gar-El calmly replied, as if proving that he was 10 years older than the other. "Don't you think she's cute when she teases her younger sister? I've been thinking about it for a long time, but Lady Adelia really resembles Count Chase." "You're right." Jude had no choice but to agree without saying anything this time. "Anyway, isn't it about time for you to help her?" "You're right." Jude grinned and quickly approached Cordelia, who was struggling and searching a solution by herself, instead of actively sending a help message. And half an hour later, standing in the middle of the ranks of the Great Storm Tribe, as they moved towards gentle Snow Breeze's basin, Jude glanced at his side. To avoid standing out in the gathering of the various tribes, Cordelia wore the traditional clothes of the Great Storm Tribe as she walked while sulking. How mysterious. Her rabbit ears were drooping as if to reflect her emotions. Of course, her rabbit tail too. "Hey, Cordelia." "Why?" At her curt reply, Jude drew his face closer and whispered, "Do your legs hurt? Should I carry on my back?" Cordelia would normally have said okay at his piggyback offer, but it was different this time. She frowned and said as she slapped Jude's upper arm, "Go away, you demon." Wouldn't everyone look at her if she got carried on his back? Especially Adelia. "Hey, aren't you doing this on purpose?" "How, what?" Stop pretending to be ignorant. You deliberately called me princess when you woke me up earlier, right? Because Jude was the only one in the world who knew best on how she would react. Wasn't he intentionally making her feel troubled? What kind of person do you see me as? A scammer and an evil B***starred, a beast, a thief. No, even if I was like that in the past, haven't you been increasingly saying whatever you want as time goes on? But you admitted that you were like that in the past. Hey, Lady Cordelia. I don't know, anyway I was troubled because of you. I'm sorry about that. Would you like a piggyback ride as an apology? No, you demon, stop tempting a good lamb into your evil ways. She could feel Adelia's sharp gaze on her back, even until now. If Adelia just took one more step forward, Cordelia would be able to hear her saying, heh, at that moment. Well, it can't be helped then. Jude shrugged and Cordelia said, as her shoulders fell. It was comfortable when it was just the two of us. About a third of their traveling time had Cordelia being carried on Jude's back or comfortably seated on a sled pulled by Jude. You're right, I liked it when it was just the two of us. Cordelia nodded at Jude's words. And a little ahead of those two, Red Wind was riding a big wagon as she hugged Violent Avalanche and said, Violent Avalanche. Yes, Red Wind. Can I do well? With the help of Jude and Cordelia, she was able to become friends with the Phoenix, a powerful ancient spirit. Of course, the reborn Phoenix was just like a baby, so it was not yet able to use its power like in its prime, but a Phoenix was still a Phoenix. Compared to Red Wind's normal strength, she had become 3 times, no, at least 5 times stronger than before. Unnai taught me a lot of things. Cordelia was vastly knowledgeable about spirits despite being a wizard. She gave detailed instructions on how Red Wind should fight and how to fight together with the Phoenix, while fully understanding each other's thoughts and intentions, which was unexpectedly perfect for her. Oppa helped me a lot too. She wondered where he learned it, but Jude almost perfectly reproduced the combat method of Sun's Song, her opponent in Caravel. Red Wind had obviously not directly met Sun's Song, so it was unclear whether the combat method Jude demonstrated was exactly the same as Sun's Song's combat method, but Red Wind trusted Jude. Since Jude said it was true, it must be true. His big brother also helped. It was only one day, but Gar-El also helped her. Jude was smaller than Sun's Song, so even if he fully reproduced Sun's Song's combat method, there would inevitably be some missing parts, but Gar-El made up for that lacking parts. They're really amazing. How could they easily imitate other people's combat method like that? Gar-El reproduced Sun's Song's combat method almost as perfectly as Jude, and Red Wind was able to acquire a more realistic sense of battle. And now, Red Wind felt anxious. It was unavoidable. The fate of the wild land was literally at stake in this caravel. Red Wind was a young girl. Her experience was lacking enough to the point that the only thing she had been responsible so far was caring for the horses they raised at home. For her, caravel was too big of a burden. No matter how hard she trained, she felt like her whole body was overwhelmed by fear every time she opened her eyes in the morning. What if I don't win? If she lost, then the Blade Song tribe would become the head of the Eastern Alliance. Obviously, the Great Storm tribe would not suddenly be annihilated if the Blade Song tribe became the leader of the alliance. It was a gathering of the East to liberate the West that was occupied by the demon followers. Whether she won or lost, the Great Storm tribe and Blade Song tribe were allies, not enemies. But even so, Red Wind. Yes, Violent Avalanche. Don't worry, it's going to be fine. Really? Yes, trust me, and them too. Unnai and Oppa. Yes, didn't they train you? I hate to admit it, but they are incredible people. I understand why the Golden Dragon King recognized those two as guardians even though they were not from the Wild Lands. If Jude and Cordelia had not come, Violent Avalanche itself would have been corrupted with its sanctuary and became a monster. Gentle Snow Breeze would have also become a crazy monster, and the Raptor Canyon would have become the land of demons. Blue Whisker's sacred place would have been taken away by the demon followers too. The two had stopped all of that. Therefore, Violent Avalanche couldn't help but admit the two's contributions. Even if you don't believe in yourself, you can trust those two, right? Yes, I trust them. Because the two had saved her from the auction house themselves. It's a temporary measure. After all, you have to believe in yourself. But if you find it hard right now, trust those two then. And don't you know those two well either? If your skills weren't enough, they would have somehow pestered you excessively even now. That's true. The two were really strict when she was training. A girlish smile spread over Red Wind's face, while Violent Avalanche happily smiled and spoke. It's your first time going to gentle Snow Breeze's land, right? Yes, it's my first time. Then you'll see something wonderful. There's a wide field in front of the basin. The waves of the green fields as it sway and follow the wind are truly spectacular. You are really. For real. A fresh green field that is not covered by snow. It was not far now. She would say it soon. However, what is this? Why can't I see it? Why are there widespread signs of a fire everywhere? Where did the field go? Why do I keep thinking of my collapsed rocky mountain? What happened? What, huh? No way. Violent Avalanche's head turned. Red Wind also looked at the same place as the wild god. And a flinch. Cordelia instinctively felt the gazes of the two and flinched. It was impossible for her, but she still tried to avoid Violent Avalanche and Red Wind's gazes. Can you come here for a minute? She heard Violent Avalanche's voice in her head, and Cordelia pulled Jude's arm. Tusk, it can't be helped. Jude took the lead as if hiding Cordelia as he faced Violent Avalanche, but the wild god stared at Cordelia instead of Jude. The wild god sent a glance to Cordelia, who was kinder, more honest, and more innocent than Jude, as it asked for an explanation. Oh, that is the field. The field. That there was not. What is she talking about? Instead of continuing to speak more, she pulled Jude's arm hard, and Jude gave his own explanation again. They are the gods of destruction, the gods of destruction. When Violent Avalanche heartfully said that, the ranks of the Great Storm tribe completely stopped moving. Because they have reached the entrance to gentle Snow Breeze's basin. We welcome the Great Storm tribe. People gathered from all over the place as fine snow and clear snow, the great shamans of the gentle Snow Breeze tribe, shouted together. Most of them were from the gentle Snow Breeze tribe, who gathered to welcome them, but some of them were the heads of other tribes, who came from far away for this caravel. Violent Avalanche, my older brother. Gentle Snow Breeze, it's been a while. Violent Avalanche jumped off the wagon, and ran towards Gentle Snow Breeze on all fours, and Gentle Snow Breeze tightly hugged the bear cub in her arms. You've become so cute. It somehow happened. But you're still my older brother. I feel reassured with you here. Thank you for coming. Gentle Snow Breeze smiled before releasing Violent Avalanche from her arms. She then faced Red Gale, the chieftain of the Great Storm tribe. Red Gale greets Gentle Snow Breeze. Nice to meet you, Red Wind and the Great Storm tribe. I welcome your visit here. The friendly attitude of Gentle Snow Breeze deeply moved not only Red Gale, but also the entire Great Storm tribe. Though in the form of a little girl, she was clearly a wild god, someone who transcended humans and a target of worship for those living in the wild lands. Then let's get inside first, take a rest from the fatigue of your journey. It was the moment when Gentle Snow Breeze said that. Violent Avalanche suddenly turned around, and so did Cordelia, whose senses were the best amongst all the people here. They hadn't seen it yet. They didn't hear a sound. But after a while, they heard footsteps. The vibrations from a distance shook the ground, and the sound of a big horn came with the wind. The Blade Song. A tribe of belligerent warriors who repeatedly fought against the northern jackdaws. And the person who laid them. It was no exaggeration to say that he, the chieftain of the Blade Song tribe, was the strongest warrior in the east at a time when Red Gale was sick. 9 blades. and his son, Sun Song, a participant of the caravel. They advanced forward with several large and colorful flags. As they loudly sang and played drums, they approached the entrance of the basin. One day left until the beginning of the caravel. Thanks for watching. Please sub and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story.